The dust was a living thing, a fine red shroud that coated Alara's tongue and settled in the lines around her eyes. It rose from the cracked earth with every gust of wind, a constant reminder of the world's indifference. For 3 days, the broken axle of their wagon had been an anchor, holding them fast in this vast, sun-scorched purgatory. Hope had withered like the sparse vegetation around them, turning brittle and then crumbling to nothing. 6 other women, their faces drawn and smudged with dirt, looked to her. Their hope had been placed in her hands when her husband, Thomas, had taken his last, rattling breath 2 weeks prior, and now that hope was as empty as their water barrels. She felt the weight of their silent fear, a physical pressure on her chest that made each breath a labor. The youngest, a girl of 17 named Mary, cradled a feverish child, her own, humming a tune that was thin and sharp with desperation. The sound was a razor against Alara's frayed nerves. This was not a journey west. It was a slow, undignified march toward oblivion. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, allowed the despair to wash over her. It was a dark, seductive tide, promising an end to the struggle. But the child coughed, a dry, rasping sound, and the tide receded. She could not surrender. She would not. It was on the evening of the 3rd day, as the sun bled across the horizon and painted the sky in cruel, beautiful shades of orange and purple, that she saw it. A flicker, so faint she thought it a trick of her exhausted mind, a phantom conjured by heat and grief. But it came again, a steady, pinprick of gold against the deepening twilight. A light, a lamp in a window. It meant shelter. It meant water. It meant a life beyond this desolate patch of earth. A current of raw, primal energy shot through her. She rose, her bones aching in protest. "Get up," she said, her voice a croak she barely recognized as her own. The other women stared, their eyes hollow. "There," Alara pointed, her finger trembling slightly. A light for a moment. There was only the wind. Then, one by one, they staggered to their feet, a small, tattered flock turning toward a distant, uncertain star. The walk was a pilgrimage of ghosts. The ground was uneven, littered with stones that turned their ankles and tore at their worn shoes. With every step, Alara's mind raced. Who lived out here in such profound isolation? A madman? A hermit? Someone who cherished his solitude with the same ferocity that she now cherished the idea of survival? The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but the light was a promise, and she walked toward it as a dying plant leans toward the sun. As they drew closer, a shape resolved itself from the gloom. A small, sturdy cabin of dark timber, a barn standing sentinel beside it. A thread of smoke curled from a stone chimney, carrying the scent of burning cedar and something else. Something savory that made her stomach clench with a painful, desperate hunger. The property was stark but orderly. Fences were mended. A small garden was protected from scavengers, and a deep, stone-lined well stood near the porch. This was the home of a person who understood the land, who fought it and respected it in equal measure. A dog began to bark, a low, menacing sound that echoed the distrust in Alara's own heart. The cabin door opened, casting a rectangle of warm, yellow light onto the porch. A man emerged, a silhouette against the lamp glow. He was tall and broad, holding a rifle that rested in the crook of his arm with unnerving familiarity. He did not speak. He simply stood there, watching them approach, his stillness more intimidating than any shout. Alara halted her small, wretched procession a dozen yards from his porch. She could see his face now, etched with lines that spoke of sun and hardship, not age. His eyes were shadowed, his expression unreadable, a mask of stone. She swallowed the dust in her throat. "Sir," she began, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Our wagon. It's broken. We have a sick child. We need water." He remained silent, his gaze sweeping over them, lingering on the pale faces, the tattered dresses, the utter destitution of their party. His eyes were not cruel, she realized, but appraising. They were the eyes of a man weighing a risk, calculating a cost. The world had taught her that charity was a myth, and survival was a transaction. She had nothing to offer but their misery, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it was not nearly enough. He gestured with the rifle barrel, not toward the road, but toward the barn. "There," he said. The single word was rough, as if scraped from a dry well. It was not a welcome, but a concession, an acknowledgement of their presence that offered nothing more than a roof against the night's chill. They huddled together in the hay-scented darkness of the barn, the scent of dust and old wood a strange comfort. He brought them water from the well, a single bucket, and a loaf of dark, dense bread that they tore apart with trembling hands. He set it down and left without another word, the heavy barn door closing with a sound of finality. For 2 days this was their world. He worked his land from dawn until dusk, a solitary figure moving with an unhurried, relentless rhythm. He mended a fence, chopped wood, tended his small herd of cattle. He seemed oblivious to their existence, a silent, brooding landlord to his unwanted tenants. Yet, in the morning and evening, a bucket of water and a portion of food would appear just inside the barn door. It was sustenance without softness, provision without pity. Alara watched him. She saw the way his hands, though calloused and rough, were gentle with his animals. She saw the efficiency in his every movement, a man who wasted nothing. Not time, not energy, not words. The child, Thomas's namesake, was weakening. The water and bread were not enough. His fevered cries grew fainter, his small body listless. Alara's desperation curdled into a hard knot of resolve. She saw the animal that could save him. A single, dun-colored cow with a gentle face and a full udder, kept separate from the others in a small pen. She waited until the sun was high and he was returning from the far pasture. She stepped out of the barn, blocking his path to the cabin. He stopped, his eyes narrowing slightly. The silence stretched between them, thick with the shimmering heat. "The child needs milk," she said, her voice flat, stripped of pleading. It was a statement of fact, not a request. He stared at her, his jaw tight. He had a past, she knew. A place like this, a solitude this profound, was not chosen. It was earned through suffering. She could see the ghosts in his eyes, the barricades he had erected around his heart. "That cow is all I have for myself," he finally said, his voice low. "She's not for charity." "We are not asking for charity," Alara replied, her gaze unwavering. "We will work. All of us." He looked past her, toward the other women who had gathered timidly in the barn doorway, their faces pale and anxious. He saw their frailness, their city-soft hands. A flicker of something, disdain, perhaps, or just weary pragmatism, crossed his face. "Work at what? You can't handle this land." The words were a dismissal, a judgment on her and all that she was. The grief and fear she had held at bay for weeks suddenly ignited into a cold, sharp anger. "You know nothing about us," she said, her voice quiet but fierce. "You see weakness because you want to see it. Give us the work. If we fail, you lose nothing. If we succeed, the child gets milk." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze so intense it felt as if he were trying to see into her very soul, to find the cracks in her resolve. He was testing her, she realized. He was testing her will against his own. He finally gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "The woodpile," he said, gesturing with his chin toward a mountain of uncut logs. "It needs to be split and stacked by the cabin." Before dusk it was an impossible task. But as she turned and walked back to the women, a grim sense of purpose settled over her. It was a chance. It was a beginning. The work was brutal. The axe was heavy, its handle smooth and unforgiving against their uncalloused palms. Blisters formed, broke, and bled. The sun beat down, relentless. The other women, spurred by Alara's quiet determination, worked in a desperate, uncoordinated fury. They hauled logs, they attempted to swing the axe, they gathered the split wood and carried it, armful by armful, to the growing stack beside the cabin. Alara took the lead, her movements clumsy at first, then finding a painful, jarring rhythm. The shock of the axe striking would travel up her arms and into her shoulders, a punishing echo of her own stubbornness. She did not look at the cabin. She did not look at the man, Silas, who watched them for a time from his porch before turning to his own chores. She focused only on the log in front of her, the swing of the blade, the sharp crack of splitting wood. It was a penance, a prayer, a declaration of war against her own despair. By late afternoon, their bodies screamed in protest. Mary was weeping silently as she worked, her tears leaving clean streaks on her dirty face. But the woodpile near the cabin was no longer a small mound. It was a respectable wall of fuel for the coming cold. As the shadows lengthened, Silas emerged from the cabin. He walked to the woodpile, his expression unreadable. He ran a hand over the stacked logs, testing their stability. He picked up a piece, examined the clean split, and dropped it back onto the pile. He did not look at them. He walked to the pen, untied the milking cow, and led her into the barn. He returned with a pail, half filled with frothing, warm milk, and set it on the ground near Alara. "Don't let it sour," he said, and walked back to his cabin. That first taste of milk, given to the sick child, was a sacrament. It was the taste of survival, of a bargain kept. From that day, a new routine was forged in silence and sweat. Every morning, Silas would outline a task: weeding the garden, mending a section of fence, clearing stones from a small patch of land he intended to plow. And every day, the women would work until their muscles burned and their hands were raw. In the evening, the pail of milk would appear. There was no praise, no acknowledgement of their effort beyond that simple, life-giving exchange. Trust was not given, it was being built, one split log, one pulled weed at a time. Then came the storm. It swept in from the north, a wall of churning black cloud that swallowed the sky. The temperature plummeted. The wind shrieked, tearing at the roof of the barn. Rain turned to sleet, then to a blinding curtain of snow. It was a freak autumn blizzard, a sudden, violent assault by a world that had grown tired of their defiance. For 2 days they were all trapped, the 7 women in the barn, Silas in his cabin. On the 3rd morning, the wind died, leaving behind a world of profound, suffocating silence, buried in white. The cabin door creaked open. Silas stood there, his face grim. "The cattle," he said, his voice tight with worry. "They drifted south with the wind. They'll be in the ravine." Buried without another word, he began strapping on heavy snowshoes. Alara watched him, saw the exhaustion in his posture, the stark reality of what he faced. Losing those cattle would mean ruin. It would mean a winter of starvation. He was one man against a mountain of snow. "We're coming," she said. He turned, a protest already forming on his lips. "You'll slow me down. You can't do it alone," she countered, her voice leaving no room for argument. She was no longer asking. She was stating a fact. She looked at the other women. Their faces were pinched with cold and fear, but when they looked at her, they nodded. They had learned the hard language of this place. Survival was not a solitary endeavor. It was a shared burden. He stared at her, and in his eyes, she saw the walls begin to crack. He saw not a group of helpless refugees, but a small, determined company. He gave a single, sharp nod. The trek to the ravine was a descent into a frozen hell. The snow was deep, a deceptive, glittering blanket that hid treacherous drifts and hollows. Silas broke trail, his powerful legs driving a path through the waist-high powder, while the women followed in his wake, their borrowed wraps and thin shawls offering little protection against the biting cold. Alara's lungs burned with every breath of frigid air. The world was a stark monochrome of white snow and black rock, the silence broken only by the rhythmic crunch of their steps and the ragged sound of their breathing. She watched Silas, the set of his shoulders, the determined line of his jaw. He was a part of this landscape, as hard and unyielding as the frozen ground beneath them. But there was a fragility to him now, the strain of a man facing the potential loss of everything he had fought to build. They found the cattle huddled together for warmth at the bottom of the ravine, their backs caked with snow, their breath pluming in the still air. Some were standing, shivering, but several were down, half buried and too weak to rise. A pack of wolves circled on the ridge above, their eyes glinting, patient and hungry. The sight sent a fresh wave of cold through Alara, a fear more primal than any she had known. This was the raw, brutal calculus of nature. Without intervention, the weak would be taken. Silas didn't hesitate. He slid down the snowy embankment, pulling a shovel from his pack. "We have to dig them out," he yelled, his voice carrying in the unnaturally quiet air. "Clear the snow. Get them on their feet before the wolves decide to come down." The women followed, sliding and stumbling, their fear momentarily eclipsed by the urgency of the task. They dug with their bare hands, with broken branches, with a ferocity born of shared desperation. The cold was a physical pain, seeping into their bones, but they worked side by side with Silas, their movements becoming a frantic, unified rhythm. Alara found herself beside him, clearing snow from a young calf that had fallen. Their shoulders brushed. In that fleeting contact, she felt not the distance of a reluctant host, but the warmth of an ally. He glanced at her, his eyes conveying a message his words never could, a grudging respect, an acknowledgement of her strength. As they worked, a low growl echoed from the ridge. A large, dark wolf had separated from the pack, creeping lower, its belly close to the snow. Silas straightened, his hand going to the knife at his belt. His face was a mask of grim resolve. But before he could move, Mary, the young mother, let out a sharp, piercing scream. It was not a sound of fear, but of pure, unadulterated rage. She grabbed a heavy branch and beat it against a rock, the sharp cracks echoing through the ravine like gunshots. The other women, taking her cue, began to shout and bang whatever they could find, creating a cacophony of desperate noise that shattered the predatory silence. The wolf hesitated, startled by the sudden, aggressive clamor from these creatures it had marked as prey. It looked from the women to the lone man, its yellow eyes weighing the risk. After a long, tense moment, it turned and slunk back up the ridge to rejoin the pack. Silas stared at the women, at the ferocity on their faces, the defiance in their eyes. He looked at Alara, who stood her ground, her chin high, her hands raw and red from the snow. A slow, profound understanding dawned in his expression. He had seen them as a liability, a weakness. He had been wrong. Together, they got the last of the cattle standing. The journey back was an arduous, slow-motion procession, pushing the weakened animals up the slope and back toward the promise of the barn. By the time they returned, dusk was falling, casting long, blue shadows across the snow. The world was quiet again, but it was a different silence. It was the silence of exhaustion, of a battle won. That night, for the first time, he did not leave their food at the door. He brought a steaming stew into the barn, along with 7 wooden bowls. He sat with them on a hay bale, the lantern light casting a warm glow on their weary faces. No one spoke of the wolves, or the cold, or the work that still lay ahead. They simply ate, the silence now a comfortable blanket, a shared space of unspoken gratitude and mutual respect. Alara looked at Silas, his hard features softened in the lamplight, and she knew a fundamental shift had occurred. They were no longer just survivors sharing a space. They were a partnership forged in snow and silence. The unforgiving land had tested them, and in meeting its challenge together, they had found something unexpected, the foundation of a home.